if you prepared a drasha, if you got the inspiration for this drasha, I feel like give it, and give it with everything that you have. You never know who's in the audience who needs to hear what you have. And you just never know. You think you're speaking to this person over here who needs to hear this message, and there's a woman in the back who like is in tears afterwards because they needed to hear that. So if you have it, give it with passion, whether or not the room is half full, completely full. Like everybody there needs to hear, or you never know who's there who needs to hear what it is that you have to say.
Rabbi Yechezkel Freundlich is senior rabbi of Congregation Beth Sholom in Lawrence, New York. His career began in Chinuch, not in Rabbanus. So when Rabbi Fruendlich found himself having to prepare and deliver Drashos, it was something he sweated over.
I remember stressing the entire week about a Shalashudis speech. I remember it, the sleepless nights on Friday night, those early years of like literally not doing anything all Shabbos other than preparing a 6-minute Shalashudis talk.
But he soon hit his stride as Associate Rabbi at Congregation Beth Jacob in Atlanta, Georgia, where he discovered the power of a great story.
Lo ha-medrash ha'ikar ela ha-maisa. It's not the drasha, lo ha-medrash ha'ikar ela ha-maisa. It's the story you tell. That's what everybody remembers.
Thus began his practice of curating relatable stories.
Anything that happens in my life, that happens around me, that happens in the world around me, that can be used to express something.
Literally wherever he could find them.
My kids know, like, they're like, anytime anything happens, they're like, oh, this is going to be a drasha. They know it. And it's a running joke in the house. I'm like, yeah, it's true. That's for sure going to be a drasha.
In this delightful episode of the Maggid Method, we discuss how long should you speak for.
Finish your speech so that your audience wished you spoke longer rather than too long wishing that you had sat down earlier.
How Rabbi Fruendlich deals with the contention that perhaps his drashos are not as sophisticated as others.
If you want sophisticated, if you want intellectual, here's our schedule. Sunday morning there's a chabura. Before davening is a chumash share. Before mincha is a shir. Thursday night's a gemara share. I got plenty of opportunities. Come and learn. Shabbos morning, it is going to be lighter. It's going to be engaging. It's going to be, I hope, funny. It's going to be with a story. It's going to leave you with a lesson you can share at your Shabbos table. I'm not aiming for sophisticated. I want to touch everyone.
What it's like to come in and succeed a rabbi emeritus who's been with the Kehillah for many decades.
The seat was warm. He literally retired, and I came the next week. But what I had was a Rav who had been there for 34 years and was ready to retire.
And we even talk about Kiddush clubs and drinking in shul. If, when, and how to address the issues.
I regretted never addressing Kiddush club and drinking in shul. Like I said, I missed it. I wanted to wait until I had that relationship. And then I left after only 6 years. I regret not having addressed, are we setting the good model for our children? Are we being responsible?
I learned so much from my interview with Rabbi Yechezkel Freundlich, and I'm sure you will too. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Rabbi Yechezkel Freundlich.
We spent 15 years in Atlanta. I was Rabbi Feldman's associate rabbi for like 7 or 8 of those years. And I was the head of school part-time, and in the school it was interesting. The last couple of years were interesting doing different things. But then my first position was in Montreal. We moved from Atlanta to Montreal to take over for Rabbi Steinmetz, who had left. There for 6 years. And then the government basically forced us out because of French laws that they were passing that would have impacted us and our kids. And so a year and a half ago, we moved here to Lawrence.
Okay. So maybe talk about your first position, if you don't mind, like, going back to in Atlanta, what was that like, straight out of New Yisrael?
I actually did not start in the shul. My story was in Atlanta. In the early 2000s, where before the crash, the financial crash of 2007, there were many, many, many out-of-town kollels that were springing up like all over the place. I'm sure Columbus was one of them. So Atlanta had one already that had existed for quite a number of years, but they were looking to actually start a new type of kollel that was going to be involved in a high school, creating a yeshiva high school that did not yet exist. There was a girls' school in Atlanta. They were looking for a boys' school. And that was like this perfect mix for us at the time, in which we were going to an out-of-town place, which we were real excited about. but it wasn't to be as part of a full-time out-of-town kollel. It was like a high school kollel in which we'd be learning with boys. And at that time, I really had my head set on teaching Chinuch. That's what I thought I was going to be doing for my whole life. And so we moved down there. We were part of this high school. We got it up off the ground as part of the kollel. And after I eventually taught ninth grade, I was a ninth grade Rabbi after 2 years in the kollel. And it took me about 6 months in the classroom to realize that that was actually not what I wanted to spend my entire life doing.
Took you that long?
And I had an amazing, I had 5 boys. It was a tiny class in a startup school. They were good kids. I loved it. I always describe to people like a high school teaching or classroom teaching is very structured. Here's your classroom. There are the 4 walls. You know what time your periods start every day and when it ends. You know what your vacation days are. And I just, like being a Rav is the exact opposite. It's totally unstructured. You never know what your day is going to look like. And so I started looking around. We're in Atlanta, Georgia, and I needed to figure out what I wanted to do. And so at that point, really, where a lot of people were suggesting to me, like Rabbanus is really where you should put your energies into. I spoke with everybody who I knew, all my old rebbeim and friends and colleagues, and so that's what we decided to do. I went back to Georgia State. I got a master's in counseling, and was going to start looking around for an assistant rabbi position. As I finished my degree, the current or present at that time assistant rabbi in Atlanta left, and so the position opened up. And making a very long and complicated story short, I ended up getting that position to stay in Atlanta. We already had lived here for about 5 years, and became the assistant rabbi for Rabbi Feldman. That was our first experience, and it was a blessing because most first-time young rabbis, it's a lot at once. But I already was in the community for 5 years, so we really pretty much knew the shul really well. The shul knew us very well. I knew the workings of the shul. I knew Rabbi Feldman, and it was really a great landing pad to begin. Plus the fact that I was a lot older. Like I have interns now from YU who are 23, 24. I was 29, 30 when I started because I already had spent all those years in kollel and spent those years teaching. And then by the time I started, so I was a little bit older, began to mature a little bit at that age. And I knew the community. So it was really a great place to start as an assistant rabbi. Yeah.
And so you probably, like you said, you already had the buy-in. You knew people that you probably taught a lot of their kids, and so it was a natural fit. And so, how often did you speak when you were the assistant rabbi?
I was there for 8, 9 years. So going back to the beginning, was probably maybe once a Shabbos. I would probably either. I'm trying to remember. I remember speaking Shalashudis a lot in those early years. I remember stressing the entire week about a Shalashudis speech. I remember it, the sleepless nights on Friday night. And I remember that measuring rod as a progression from those early years of like literally not doing anything all Shabbos other than preparing a 6-minute Shalashudis talk to the end of my time in Atlanta, like preparing it on my walk to shul for mincha. It just was it was an informal slot. But in the beginning, it was a big deal. I spoke from the pulpit very rarely in the beginning, for sure. But then somewhere in the middle of my years, I don't remember exactly when it started, we created what was called the 9 o'clock minyan. It was basically just another minyan for young professionals. It became very, very popular, and I ran that so that Rabbi Feldman ran the main minyan, and I was downstairs in this smaller minyan, and I spoke every week. And then I would speak, 2-3 times a Shabbos because I would speak, give the drasha, and then we had a little 10-minute chabura after because we always finished before the main minyan. So before we would join their kiddush, we would have a little learning. And then plus I would do Shalashudis regularly, and I would even speak Friday nights pretty regularly. Rabbi Feldman always spoke Friday night, and I would take over that. So by the end, it was very, very free. Every Shabbos would be 2 or 3 times a Shabbos I would be speaking, and I had a minyan that I was running.
Yeah. And so how did you approach that speaking slot, let's say the drasha slot, at least in the earlier years when it was more intermittently, and then when it was the young professionals minyan? Because I know Rabbi Feldman, he told me he doesn't prepare much, at least. speaks. It's evolving as he's speaking. And so,
Yes.
what did you follow that model, or were you?
No, I did not follow that model. I did not, and when I was in the beginning, I assumed that that would be something that I would grow into. Like that was like looking at him as like 20, 30 years my senior, having all of this experience. I came in, and I remember this very clearly. It was like the number was 12 minutes. And that was the target every week, to never go over 12 minutes. And that was a big thing because Rabbi Feldman generally spoke longer than that, far longer than that. And I think a lot of that was because of what he just said, which was like he was working, he's working it out as he was speaking, and it would go wherever it would go. And as a listener, which I was frequently, like feeling like it needs to be shorter, like the generation that we're in right now. And Rabbi Feldman was a bridge between his father and I guess my generation. His father, should live and be well, probably spoke for 30 to 45 minutes. Like he was the main attraction in shul. You came to Beth Jacob in Atlanta to hear what Rabbi Manuel Feldman had to say. So he would give long lectures.
And that was before Musaf?
I can't tell you when he spoke. That was before by the time I got there, he was retired. Rabbi Feldman was already there 10 years when I got there, the younger Rabbi Feldman. So I don't know when he spoke, if it was before Musaf or after that, I don't know. But it was a talk. He gave a talk. I think he told me he even only spoke like 3 out of 4 weeks. Like it wasn't every Shabbos, but it was a talk. And the new generation that I felt I was part of, like no one came to hear. 20 minutes was already way too long. And so it was like a 12-minute. And I had guys in shul who would time me to make sure that I was under 12 anytime I spoke. That was it was critical to be that way. And so I couldn't go up. But again, in the early years, I thought it was like I just wasn't yet experienced enough to do that. But then even as time went on, I just felt it was more important to really know where you're going and sit down earlier rather than later. It sort of like developed a mantra of mine, which I've shared with my interns all the time here. Always finish your speech so that your audience wished you spoke longer rather than too long, wishing that you had sat down earlier. So like just sort of always get it in there and sit down so that they were like, wow, it was great. I wish you would have kept going. No one actually wants you to keep going, but you want them to feel that way, that like you packed it in, it was tight, you got a lot in a short amount of time, they learned something, and then you sat back down.
Yeah, leave them wanting more. So this was, I guess, because you had gone from Chinuch into Rabbanus, what was your model for speaking? If it wasn't Rabbi Feldman, where did you figure out how to pull it together?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it sort of developed, but basing myself on what you sort of introduced yourself to me as, like, it's entertainment. In the same way as a classroom, anyone who's been in a high school classroom knows you are first and foremost an entertainer. It's just the reality. You cannot engage high school students if you're not engaging, if you don't have something of interest, if you don't grab them and keep them and show them whatever it is, why what you're saying is more important than whatever it is that they'd rather be doing, which as a high school student is like literally anything other than what you're doing. And speaking to adults is similar. Many adults are much more interested in what you have to say naturally, but you're an entertainer. I've always viewed myself as in a form of entertainment, just with I'm not there to entertain just for the sake of entertainment, like in the world of entertainment, but an entertainment to create a message and to inspire and to teach. But we're just not in a world where you could just get up and open up and say, in this week's parsha, the pasuk, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It has to have something that's engaging, that's relevant, that they feel they can take home and share with their family. Always, I sort of just, again, this is nothing, no big chiddush, but just always short enough that your audience can remember and share what you said at their Shabbos table, and long enough to be of value. It's meaningful. But if it gets too long and no one can go home and share it, then you've lost something because there were too many parts, too many connections. If someone can't go home and someone says, what did the rabbi say? And you can't say it over, then it was too complicated and too long. So it's got to be engaging, with a nice story or a joke that will remind them of what you said, and then the message, and they could tie it all together as best they can with what you said.
Yeah. And so, did you have a methodology, or were you just kind of, did you find things that you wanted to speak about and then go looking for a Torah to support it, or was it the other way around? You look for something good to say and.
Yeah, I learned something from my Rav growing up, Rabbi Yaakov Luban in Highland Park, New Jersey. I remember at one point he said to me, this is after I already had grown up and left the community, but I had come back to visit my parents, and he said, "Lo hamedrash ha'ikar ela hamaisa." It's not the medrash, it's not the learning. In the context in Pirkei Avos, it's not about what you learn, but about what you do. But he was using it as a rabbinic method of speaking. It's not the drasha, lo hamedrash ha'ikar ela hamaisa. It's the story you tell. That's what everybody remembers. That's what conveys a message. And I don't remember exactly when or how this developed, but it's certainly become the way that I have always worked my drashas, is always looking for the story and to build a drasha around it. So it's almost like a modern day Dubna Maggid, who used to say, like, I come up with a parable, and then I paint the what did he used to say? I paint the target on the tree. At first I shoot the arrow, and then I paint the target around the arrow. So I come up with a mashal, then I find the experience of what this teaches us. A good story is gold. And a good story, I discovered just through speaking a lot, is not what people often view as a major story. A story is just a life experience that happened. While you were shopping and somebody said something to you, looking for a parking spot, trying to make a left turn and nobody lets you in. Just sharing life experiences, and people relate to them. People remember them. People like, I also had that experience. And then you can take that and show how Rashi said a comment in the Parsha and how it's reflected in this story. So I'm always noticing, things that go on. People always ask me, they say, how come all these stories always happen to you? And they're like, they don't happen to me any more than anyone else. It's just, I have the pressure of giving a drasha every single week. So I'm always looking for anything that happens in my life, that happens around me, that happens in the world around me, that can be used to express something. And then you find that then it's seeing what's going on in the parsha, what's on in the world, that connects, that just brings home a real idea that's relevant to people. So I try to always have a story of some sort that people can relate to.
Yeah. Can you give me an example? We're on Tuesday, so it can't be so far away from Shabbos.
Yeah. So I can give you some examples. Also, it's just this past drasha that I gave, which wasn't so much. I told how this isn't going to be a great example for you, but let me see. I guess I'll start with what I did this past week, just because that's fresh in my mind, and then I'll find you some other examples as we went through. So this past week, I was getting a haircut, and my barber is a Jewish guy here in Lawrence, New York, said to me, "Wasn't the fast of Esther in Nisan and not in Adar? Why are we fasting this week if that's not when the Megillah's fast took place?" So I gave him whatever. I explained to him whatever it was, but that little exchange, instead of starting a drasha with, a question on the Megillah, I started it with a story, a comment that somebody made to me. And you can introduce a question. Questions are also great things. The drasha this week, I had two questions. I presented, I had been in APAC the previous week, and sort of did the same thing, in which a speaker was talking about something in which he was presenting why he felt, just in this particular example, the lack of international support for Israel is a greater threat to the Jewish people than anti-Semitism. So instead of just presenting the way that he presented it, which was just as a statement of fact, so I said I was in APAC and we learned about all the multi-fronts that the Jewish nation and the state of Israel is fighting militarily and on the campuses and in Capitol Hill and all of these different things. And of all of these different things, I'd like to pose to you the following question. And I posed as a question something from APAC, even though nobody actually posed it as a question. And I asked in shul, what do you think is the greatest threat facing the Jewish people right now? Is it anti-Semitism, and I described a whole bunch of stories that are in the news right now, or is it the lack of international support, and describe that. And then saying, I was in a session and the speaker, whoever it was, said it's this. So that through introducing it as more of a story of what happened to me, it sort of changed that. That's not what you're looking for. I'll come back to another example as it comes to me. I guess I gave the left turn signal. I could do that. I live on a street where it's a tough left turn out of my block during most hours of the day, and everybody knows that it's like a busy street down Broadway. Making a left turn is impossible. So I ran a whole bit about getting to that place, and like no one ever stops to let you in, and you can wait there, forever until somebody recognizes me as the rabbi, and then when they recognize me as the rabbi sitting there waiting, I'll get a couple cars. To stop. So I just tell over this whole story. I just try to flesh it out. It's like an important thing, and everybody knows what I'm talking about, and everybody's laughing, and everybody's embarrassed. Like, why does nobody ever stop just because he's not, like, maybe it's your mother. Like, can't you stop for your mother's best friend? Wouldn't you stop for her? Anyway, that's not it. I hope you'll edit all that out because it doesn't come out clear and it's not helping your point. I'll come up with some better stuff along the way.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So you kind of curate anecdotes as you kind of journey through the week and find most engaging, interesting things that will draw people in as you begin your drasha. And then how do you find a connection that doesn't feel forced? Because sometimes there's just not. You got lucky about the barber. He asked you something that was in Yana Dioma, but let's say that or anti-Semitism, unfortunately. But like, how do you find something that sometimes there's just no connection? Do you struggle to find a connection even if it feels manufactured, or do you just say, I don't need a connection, I'm just going to speak Torah?
Yeah, no, that is like, so pocket it. If a good story, a good anecdote happens and you can't work it in, happens all the time, tuck it away for another week. Not every story has to be like said immediately. It's like you could hold on to a story for a while. Keep a little. I have a little file. Brief anecdotes just to remind myself. And I agree with you. If you force a story in a way it doesn't really connect, everyone's like, everyone has the same feeling you're just expressing. Like, that didn't really work. That doesn't really express whatever it is that you're talking about, and that doesn't go. So, just because the story happened this week doesn't mean it needs to be necessarily shared this week. Right.
Do you ever get the feedback or maybe even it's just internal feedback for yourself that I, because I'm telling so many stories and anecdotes, maybe people won't think it's as sophisticated, or if it's just there's not enough substance, or fluff, or whatever people call it sometimes. Does that ever cross your mind?
Yes, a lot. And I have a personal response to that, and I don't know that this is right or not, but it's just something that I feel strongly about as a speaker. And I share this with my interns all the time. The most important thing, I think, when you get up to speak is recognizing what's the environment that you're speaking and who are your listeners. So in a shul, as an example, so before davening, we have a chumash year. So chumash year is 20 minutes before davening. Anyone who came, they came to learn. So the moment you open up your mouth, you better be teaching Torah, because that's why somebody came. We have a shiur for a half hour before mincha. Same story. Anybody who's there came to learn. Your job is to teach them. There's no beating around the bush, no cute stories. If you spend 5 out of those 20 minutes telling some story, they came to learn. I use shalashudas as the opposite example. Why is somebody sitting there shalashudas? They're sitting there shalashudas because they live too far to go home, and they need to wait for Mariv, and they have to eat anyway. And when you get up to speak, all you're doing is disturbing their conversation with whoever they were sitting with. Nobody came to shalashudas to hear you speak. That's not why they're there. So you have to recognize, as a speaker, am I here with an engaged audience who has chosen to come to hear me teach, or are they happen to be there and now you're speaking, which means that you have to engage the amount of time and how you engage them and what's the content in all of those things in terms of recognizing that. Are you speaking at a Sheva Brachos in the middle of a restaurant? How heavy in terms of Torah content when you're in every environment, and who's there, and did they expect to share? All of those things make a huge difference in the way that you present. These are all obvious points. So where does the Shabbos drasha fit in that spectrum? Where does it fit between a Chumash shir before davening, where everybody is there, wants to be there, and wants to learn, and Shalosh Shudas or a Sheva Brachos Torah, where like they're there for other reasons. They're not there to hear you speak. Where's the drasha? Where does the drasha fit on that? And that, I think, is a very shul-specific question.
Sure.
But overall, my experience is, it's sort of in the middle. There are a lot of people in shul who are not there to hear the drasha. They're there either because they really like davening or because it's just a social thing they expected to do. They have to come to shul. They're more or less engaged in davening or their Judaism as a whole. You have a wide range of people on Shabbos morning who are sitting there, from those who actually came to hear what the rabbi has to say. They're curious. They want to know, to those who really have no interest whatsoever. So in such a wide range, which is what you're speaking to, I err on the side of engagement and promoting and giving inspiration and a hashkafa, something that we value, rather than teaching them something, because it's hard to teach somebody who's not there in a mode to learn, and not everybody sitting in front of you is in a mode to learn. It's just the reality of the kind of shuls that I've been in. Excuse me. So I always say, if you want to learn, if you want sophisticated, if you want intellectual, here's our schedule. Sunday morning there's a chabura. Before davening is a chumash shir. Before mincha is a shir. Thursday night's a gemara shir. I got plenty of opportunities. Come and learn. Shabbos morning is Shavel L'chol Nefesh. It's going to hit everybody. And yes, it is going to be lighter. It's going to be engaging. It's going to be, I hope, funny. It's going to be with a story. It's going to leave you with a lesson you can share at your Shabbos table. And if you complain that it's not sophisticated enough, you're right. I'm not aiming for sophisticated. I want to touch everyone there, or as many people as I can. And if the sophisticated group says it's not enough, here are the other opportunities for you. I want to catch everybody who's there and engage and entertain. And yes, so it is true. I probably would get that complaint, but I get far more positive feedback in the sense of, that is great. I love listening. I stay awake. I learn something, even though, yes, I would totally agree with you. And I think my average listener would say it is not a super sophisticated drasha. It's not. It is, as I said, I really try to be concise. Story, something on the parsha, lesson, take home, practical. It's not super complicated, and I will never be accused of that. And that's because as a speaker, every speaker knows when you're up there, you see how fast you lose people. I see how fast it goes. If I'm off point, if I get too involved in the Dvar Torah part, is a little bit too complicated. I see I'm losing half the room because it took 6 minutes to express the Dvar Torah part. Everybody listens to a story. Every speaker will tell you. You start telling a story, and like people, they pop up and they want to know. Stories are engaging. It's Moshech es Laleid that just pulls the heart in, and so I see the drasha slot as that, as inspiration, as call to action, some type of hashkafa. You want intellectual, you want sophisticated, you want to learn, here's our schedule. We'd love to have you come join us.
Yeah. How detailed do you go into like personal stories? Will you share things about yourself, your family,
yes,
maybe your growth journey?
I do. I totally do. It's I know from a lot of people that they find that very relatable. I check with my kids. My kids know, they're like, anytime anything happens, they're like, oh, this is gonna be a drasha. They know it. And it's a running joke in the house. I'm like, yeah, it's true. That's for sure going to be a drasha. I generally check with them, beforehand, before I say anything. I try to, I won't identify them by name unless I ask them in advance. But I will regularly do that. I will poke fun at things between my wife and I all the time in a way that's fair. I'll tell you two stories you were asking before. I'll as I'm talking, I'm reminding myself of one. I spoke about a running debate my wife and I have about my coat. I come in from shul, and the most convenient place to put a coat is right on the dining room chairs because it's right when you walk in. And for years, she's like, the coat rack is like right there. It's 3 steps away. And I was like, but why? It's going to be here for an hour and I'm on my way out. And she's like, I know, but I live here. And it would be really nice if you would just hang it. And for years, this has gone on. And I use that as an introduction to people bringing their coats in Friday night and throwing them on their chairs and not hanging them up. And I spoke about that Parshas Truma, like this is Hashem's house. If we care about our own house, so anyway, but I will use that kind of story as an interaction that goes on, which I heard from like every single guy in the shul is the exact same conversation that goes on in their houses as well. That's why I do it, because I know it's not just me. That's exactly what happens.
Are you tired of the same old lecture programs that feel more like a snooze fest than a stimulating discussion? Picture this, an event filled with laughter.
One of the funniest men I've seen in many years is right here, Steinberg. He's the guy.
Inspiration and invaluable insights straight from the mouths of over 60 congregational leaders.
It was really well done. It was really well done.
We're talking about a lecture that dives deep into the art of crafting and delivering sermons.
In my mind, like, every rabbi sits down and writes a speech on Friday, but it's not true.
Packed with incredible stories, hilarious jokes, and public speaking techniques that I've gleaned from my interviews with over 60 of the best pulpit rabbis and public speakers today.
Educational, fun, but also kind of practical, because I also learned some lessons from it.
But hold on, this isn't your typical scholar-in-residence affair. This is a dynamic fusion of stand-up comedy.
There was a lot of humor in the presentation.
And was extremely funny.
Everybody was laughing. Nobody was bored.
Jewish history and pulpit wisdom from over 60 rabbis that promises to keep the audience engaged from start to finish.
There were a lot of questions. Everybody tried to keep Rabbi Steinberg longer.
If you're ready to experience the most inspirational, educational, and downright entertaining lecture,
Found it not only funny, but very relatable.
You won't want to miss out on this opportunity to put on a one-of-a-kind of event. Email daniel@maggidmethod.com for availability and booking information. Email Daniel at maggidmethod.com. This is one program your members won't soon forget.
You need to go, is what I would say.
Now back to the program.
The other story I once told about my son, he's in, I think he's in 7th grade or 8th grade at the time, I don't remember. I think it was 7th grade last year. He was on the basketball team, and he hit a buzzer beater at the end of the half. It wasn't even the end of the game; it was just the end of half. But he literally from half court, and so it was great. Everybody was jumping all over him, just like they do in the NBA. It was like a lot of fun. The kids went into halftime, and when the game ended. And I told the story how it happened to be that morning I had a funeral in New Jersey and then a dinner in New Jersey. And we live in Long Island. And so I told the whole story of like, I am the parent of the year, I said. I drove in the morning. Everybody knows Long Island. Driving to New Jersey is like the worst possible thing. I drove all the way to New Jersey for this funeral, but I didn't want to miss my son's game. So I went I was in North Shore, back to North Shore to catch his game. And then afterwards, I went straight from there back to New Jersey for this dinner, but I wanted to be there for my son. And I caught this amazing scene. I told the whole story. And then right after the game, the only question that he has to ask is, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? I was like, get what? He's like, did you get it on your phone? I was like, no, I was watching it live. And he was like, I can't believe this. And all he could talk about was that you missed the whole thing. You didn't, like, I have no highlights to send around to everybody and to rewatch. Anyway, so that was the same time LeBron James that week had just broken the NBA scoring record, and they had this great photo of him taking this last shot. And all you see in the picture is everybody, with their phones. Like, no one is watching it. Nobody is present. Nobody is there in the moment. Everybody is just looking at the event through their phone. And then we tied it into that week was, I think, Aseret Dibros. We talked about the fact that it was, on the Shabbos. Like, what would Aseret Dibros look like today? Moshe coming down there's something about Shabbos and being present. And that was the whole Shabbos. Anyway, so it's like just telling little stories like that. A simple anecdote of a simple comment that a 13-year-old boy says, did you catch it? I was like, no. And his great disappointment and making, a message of being present. So anyway, so the Dvar Torah was very straightforward. It was very simple, trying to Shabbos, but the story everybody remembers. Everybody will remember the story. Everybody will remember, trying to be present and putting your phone away with your kids and trying to convey a message such as that. But anyway, the answer to your question is yes. I use my family all the time. Obviously,
Right.
I try to use discretion, not to embarrass anybody. I don't use names if I can avoid it. Just one of the kids, but they all know it happens, and the truth is they love it. Unless it's embarrassing. But even with Balabatim also, I've learned obviously the hard way. I never to use a story, even though I always will change details. Always, always, always. But even when you change details, if the person knows that the story is really about them, I will never do that without asking them in advance. I'd like to use the story, and I tell them I'm going to change this detail so that nobody really know that it's you. But that is a very offensive thing to somebody to find out that they're being used in the rabbi's drasha, even though the rabbi changed. If it was really a man, I'll say that it was a woman, and if it happened on a Tuesday, I'll say that it happened last, whatever. But I've learned most of the time people are totally okay with it, and if not, but I don't want to ever do that without asking them. But I do try to use interactions with people because people are people, and everybody can relate to those kinds of stories, and it conveys a message in a real powerful way.
Yeah. Do you ever go deeper than beyond the the funny anecdotes and things like that in terms of your self-revelatory episodes, or anything, maybe something a challenge you're working through, or something you're struggling with, or anything like that?
I would think so. Certainly when it comes to challenges in Israel and not moving, I talk a lot about the fact that I'm here. Because I feel like it's important that we speak about making Aliyah and going home, and yet I'm still here. And so the struggles and the reasons, I do talk about things like that. But I think a little bit, I don't know, I think I have one example in my head, which is probably not what you're talking about, but it's mostly, I guess, it's mostly superficial, but I think it is, I do try to share my own experiences in some real ways or struggles. And I think people, I'm only here 2 years now, but I was in Montreal for 6, and the same. I think people connect to their Rav when they get to know their Rav, and it's not just somebody who happens to be giving a shiur, which you can get anywhere. It's somebody that they know, that they can relate to, and that the issues that the rabbi is dealing with or struggling with are the same, that they are, and that's a very. At the end of the day, the Rav's job, I feel, is to connect to the people. That's at the end of the day, it's to be a spiritual father figure, to be real, to be relatable, to be available and accessible, and we develop relationships with people that we know. And the rabbi's platform on giving a drasha, maybe in the days of old in Europe, the Rav would give over a drasha, a complicated shtickle Torah, but in today's day and age, the fact that my shul, I feel, knows me, and that's because of the fact that I share things. That's a platform to do so. And at the end of the day, that's really the most important thing, is that they feel connected, because then when they have whatever issues going on in their life, which is everyone, always, they feel a connection, and they feel like they can share, and they feel like the rabbi's gone through similar experiences or talked about similar things, and is relatable in that way. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about, that the shul feels, members of the shul, individuals in the field feel that I can talk to the Rav, I want to talk to the Rav, and he's a person that I can relate to. So I do think it's really important to be able to do so.
Yeah. Do you ever get any dissenters that may say, I've heard rabbis, when they talk about themselves, sometimes, congregants will come up and say, this is so narcissistic, or, self-absorbed of you. You're always talking about yourself, or you always, does anybody ever, are there any dissenters that take issue with?
I got a comment like that from a colleague of mine years ago, and I made a very big impact. I do try that when I am talking about myself, it is not in a voyeuristic or tooting my own horn. It's not look at what I did. It's just, something that happened to me. So I do try to be very sensitive to that, because, and as a listener of many other talks from others, there is something that right away rubs the average listener, I think, the wrong way when the speaker is talking about themselves in a way in which they're actually talking about themselves, that's somehow promoting themselves or tooting their own horn. It rubs the wrong way. I hope I don't do that too often, because I am very sensitive to that. It was pointed out to me, and it left a real strong impression. I think I probably once did that. So yes, while I do talk about myself or stories that happened to me, it's stories that happened to me. Like I didn't video my kids. Like that's not in any way that like says anything, and when I'm talking about even I was saying that I was the greatest father, I was doing that in a way to set up how my kid didn't care at all. I was a total failure. I missed the whole thing. So in a way that it became like sort of humorous, like I thought I was being so great, and look, I totally flopped the whole experience from his perspective. So yeah, I do agree with you. That is something that all speakers I think need to be super sensitive about. It does not land well when the audience feels like the speaker is talking about himself. So using things that happened to me, not finding a parking spot like in Lawrence is a big thing. So I'll talk about things like that, but not in a way that I hope. I do try to be sensitive to that, but I have not heard too many comments. So I'm hoping I'm doing a good job with that, but I do think it is an important thing as a speaker, not that the listener should feel like you're talking about yourself in that way.
Yeah. So maybe going back to Atlanta, where you started, how long did it take you to kind of hit a stride where you felt that you're starting to understand how to give a drasha and manage people's attention and
I don't have a great sense of memory. I would say probably 3 to 4 years. I was there like 8 or 9, so it probably was a couple of years of getting the sense of how long it should be and the structure. That would be my guess.
Yeah. And did you feel the freedom to kind of explore during those years, your different styles and experiment with things?
I can't honestly say that I remember like actively exploring. I probably did. I don't have any reason to assume that I didn't. Like there was no inhibition. Rabbi Feldman was not anyone who would like come over to me afterwards and like say you couldn't do this or can't do that. Like so, it was like I had the ability to. So it was more for me a natural process of just trial and error, but it wasn't an active let me try this style. It just was trying to be true to myself and feel like what worked for me as a speaker.
Yeah. And then when you got to Montreal, how did that was a large shul where you became the main rabbi, the senior rabbi there. What was that transition like for you?
It was a big transition. That first time being in the position where you're the guy. As an associate rabbi, there was a certain comfort I always found whenever Rabbi Feldman would be present. It was like, oh, okay, Rabbi Feldman's here. Like, I'm not going to have the final say, responsibility, pressure. Like, this is his shul. And then that first time walking in, like, I'm that guy that everyone's looking at saying, like, oh, good, Rabbi Fruendlich there. Like, I wasn't really ready for that. That was I felt that. I felt that pressure of having answers to questions and being the one who needed to speak. And I remember it very clearly, like when events would happen in the worlds, which always happened, knowing that as the associate, even though I really enjoyed speaking on a regular Shabbos and giving over a message, like when there was that big event and everybody was coming together for a late night Tehillim because there was a terrible bombing in Eretz Yisrael, like, oh, Rabbi Feldman's going to be the one to speak. I don't have to deal with that. And then when you get to Montreal, like that's you now. You have to be able to calm the people. You have to be able to give a message. You have to be able to put this in context. And that took time. That was for sure. I remember feeling that pressure. I still do. That's a lot. That weighs heavily, I think, on a lot of rabbis' shoulders. Certainly, I know on mine. Of being able to frame, this October 7th. Each rabbi, I speak on behalf of all the rabbis, had to figure out in real time, Shabbos morning, Simchas Torah. What are you going to do? You couldn't speak to anyone. It was Shabbos. You couldn't check in with your Rebbe. You couldn't even check in with your colleagues down the block. How are you going to handle this? And I think, and this sort of touches on a lot of the other questions you were asking, was just the authenticity of the moment. Was like, there's no prep, no speaking it over with anybody, just figuring out Shabbos morning, Shabbos afternoon, Sunday morning, Simchas Torah, just being authentic with, I cried a lot. I assume everybody did. And it wasn't like because it was real. Like, what else do you do? And trying to figure out how we're gonna, and bringing everybody along with you. Like, we're gonna figure this out together. And I kept saying, like, we're gonna have to figure this out together. I kept using the phrase. That's how I felt. Like, we're in an impossible moment. We can't not have Shabbos and Yantiv, and we can't not recognize that this greatest tragedy, which we don't even have all the details. We don't have almost any details. And we can't do this and we can't do that. We can't do anything. So we're going to do both. We're going to do the impossible. We're going to go through a Shabbos and Yantiv as information was trickling in, and we're going to cry, and we're going to dance because it's Simchas Torah, and we're going to cry, and we're going to find a way to balance. And those who feel like they can't, I totally 100% sit on the sides, go home. And those who feel like they're going to try to do both, join me. And those who feel like, you don't know what to do like that. Yes, it's all of that. And just try to name it and call it and allow people to try to experience it and try to be authentic with them as we're going through it. But all of that, to answer your original question, getting to Montreal and becoming that person who has to sort of guide, in that it was COVID within 2 years of my 3 years of my getting there. It was the same story. It's trying to figure this all out and trying to be there with the people as we all experience it, and yet trying to be a leader at the same time.
Yeah. So I'm curious, two other questions about your new position, or relatively new position in the five towns. Is first of all, you're succeeding a very long legacy of Rabbi Kenneth Hain. People say big shoes to fill, big reputation to succeed. So let's start with that. That's actually my first question, and then take it from there. But how did you approach that transition?
I'm very blessed, and I recognize it. The two senior positions that I had in Montreal and in Lawrence here succeeded very beloved and long tenured rabbis. Rabbi Steinmetz was in Montreal for 19 years. But there, he had been gone for a full year before I got there. It took the shul a whole year to go through the search and for me to come and move. So by the time I got there, the seat was cold, and they were yearning, chalishing for the next Rav. So even though I was succeeding a very popular and beloved Rav, I was blessed to come into a situation where it was already like, okay, we got to move forward. And in Montreal, in Lawrence, the seat was warm. He literally retired, and I came the next week. But what I had was a Rav who had been there for 34 years and was ready to retire. He was ready. He was done. And the shul as a whole had the same feeling of, this was amazing. You've given us 34 years of your life. You've been there for us. We love you. And you're ready to retire. And so we're ready for you to retire. So that's a blessing. It is a blessing that as a Rav to come into an environment and know that everybody's ready to move forward. Rabbi Hain literally was the epitome of the perfect Rabbi Emeritus of like, here are the keys. When can you get here? He was like just ready to hand it off. I could not get him to speak. He was like, I'm done. He would be around a lot, just wanted to sit and schmooze with the people, was not interested in any decisions. Like, he's like, I would ask him things. He's like, why are you asking me? Like, this is your shul now. Like, it was like, that was a blessing. And as far as his big shoes, I have a similar one. Like, we're very, very different. He was a YU guy. I was coming from Ner Yisrael, and I literally roomed with his son. We were roommates in high school with his son Shmuel. So it wasn't like we were colleagues. We're not colleagues. He's a mentor. He's like of the generation of those who I would ask questions to. So it was such an obvious, like, new generation in so many ways that I would literally say many times, his shoes are so big, literally and figuratively. He was like so much bigger than I am physically. And at the end of his career, he was a rabbi's rabbi. I was like, I'm not even trying. It is, and this is just new. And we would say it out loud, like, we're not even trying. It's, we're starting afresh. I'm just going to build on the legacy. He left me an amazing shul in an amazing place. I also had the blessing of coming out of COVID. When you combine a Rav who was finishing 34 years and COVID, so everything had sort of gone dormant. Just COVID, and it slowed down. So it was like the shul was like coming out of, it was like a springtime. It was like It was new, it was different, and he was so happy to have somebody new there. It was like frictionless on every level. I knew Rabbi Hebron before, as I mentioned. I called him the first time I got a call about the shul. I called him right away. And like my first question to him was like, okay, tell me the truth. Shmuel, his son, is now a Rav in North Riverdale. I was like, is Shmuel interested in this position? Because if he's interested, I'm not going anywhere now. He's like, Shmuel will not come back to this community with, in 1,000 years. He's not interested. And so we speak regularly. We did. And we played at different strengths, and so there really wasn't. It's a blessing. It's a true blessing that I can only wish upon every new Rav who's beginning and succeeding a successful Rav before him, because it was as smooth can be.
Right. I spoke to Rabbi J.J. Schachter last week, who was Rabbi Haynes' chavrusa in Drashos.
Yes.
And it sounds like he had a very different approach than you do, and sounds to me it's like a new approach for a new generation, for attention spans, for all sorts of reasons. But
I go to a lot of Rabbi Schachter's, Yarchei Kalas. I'm like, I literally sit there and I'm like, I don't understand how how could you give a drasha like this today? I literally sit there and I don't even know. It's not. I read Rabbi Norman Lamb's stuff. I love reading his material that they reprinted. And I can't even fathom giving a drasha in today's day and age in such a manner. But maybe there's still Rabbanim who do, but it's like just a totally different era. I still trying to keep to 12 minutes, 12, 15. It's just what it's got to be, in my experience.
Yeah. So the other question I had for you, and I don't know what the makeup of the shul in Montreal was, but when you're the leader of kind of an affluent congregation, so it comes with certain challenges, and I'm curious if maybe what kind of challenges might come up for you, and how you might approach them, either practically or even just emotionally. When you're dealing with a congregation, that has. They have the means, they have resources that maybe other congregations don't. Does it affect how you approach anything in terms of
not really? I try not to. I'm also sensitive. I've heard through the grapevine, in years in the rabbinate, of rabbis who become accused of only really catering to some of the wealthier members of their community. So it's something that I'm sensitive to. There is a reality. The wealthier members of your community are what drive the finances of the shul, and so you can't ignore. But a Rav has a shul, and membership is membership, and so you have to balance the reality that those who have the means to give bigger on Kol Nidre and other shul events have to also be given attention. But it can't ever be that someone can accuse the Rav of only paying attention, only speaking to, only inviting over. I feel very strongly. I try my best. I hope I'm doing a good job of that, but it's something that you're the Rav to everybody. You're the Rav to everybody, and the shul needs to feel that way. And in terms of what I would speak about or address, I haven't yet really. Really, I'm only here 2 years, so super sensitive issues I have not addressed at all yet. You really got to know your people. You can't talk about sensitive things that are going to ruffle feathers until you really know your people. You have to be able to know that you have a relationship with everybody, and that's still being developed. When I left in Montreal, I remember my last speech. I regretted never addressing Kiddush club and drinking in shul. I said, I missed it. I wanted to wait until I had that relationship, and then I left after only 6 years. And my last speech, amongst the many things that I said, was I regret not having addressed, are we setting a good model for our children? Are we being responsible? And I just never addressed overtly drinking. I didn't, and because it needs to be done in the right time. And I needed to wait, and then I waited too long, and then it was over. So here. And Lauren's a year and I have also had 2-3 different Kiddush clubs. I address it, in a joking manner all the time. I will always reference it, but I haven't yet had the conversation as a shul, we're going to talk about drinking. So I'll joke. I Shalosh Shudas this past week. I spoke about how Megillah is different in that you have to hear every word. And so I mentioned, like, and that's different. Like, even Kriyas Torah, if heaven forbid somebody would go to Kiddush Club and miss part of Laney, okay, it's not like Megillah. So like I'll always like sneak in a reference to people leaving for drinking, but I'm not talking about a drinking problem yet. You have to, like, that's just using it as an example. Like, you need a relationship, and it takes time. We're getting there, and I hope that I will not relive the mistake I made in Montreal, which I let too much time go by. But just using that as an example. But I don't know if I answered your question or not, but it's something that I haven't really felt I've avoided issues because of affluence, just because of making sure that you have the right relationship before addressing things.
Got it. Okay, and in closing, I always ask people to, if you have two bits of advice, and I know you mentioned a couple things earlier, but let's say you were trying to set up a rabbi on his on his feet, to set him up for success. Two pieces of advice that you'd give him. It could be speaking related, not necessarily, but what would those two pieces of advice be to?
All right, I guess I would. I guess I would say no one is going to like or enjoy your drasha more than you. Meaning, if you don't love what you're saying, no one else is going to love it more than what you have to be excited about what you're saying. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to hit a home run every Shabbos. You have to be real with yourself. Some Shabbosim you'll hit a home run, some will be a double, some you could feel you stretched a single into a double, and some, like, you beat out an infield hit. You really didn't have any material to work with. You got to be honest, and you got to let it go. Okay, this week was a single. Just always try to avoid striking out. That's the goal. Like, never strike out. But if you hit a single, you hit a single. A home run, if you get a home run once a month, twice a month is great. You can't expect it always. But whatever you're saying, you have to love it. You have to be excited about sharing this piece of Torah, this idea, because if you're not, guaranteed no one's going to be more excited about it. No one's going to be more excited about it than you. So that would be point number one in terms of that. I mentioned before, like, knowing your audience, like always trying to cater to what it is that you're doing. One other thing, I don't know if this is really a piece of advice, but I have found over the years it's important. I try never to bag a drush. I mentioned before bagging a story. Like, if an anecdote happens, a story happens, and you don't have anywhere to use it, okay, great, put it away. But sometimes you actually craft a drush for Shabbos, either whatever you prepare. Some people prepare early in the week, Friday, whatever it is, and you come into shul, or you realize Friday night there's like a bar mitzvah across town, or it's going to rain, and like you feel like this drasha is like this is a big crowd drasha. You prepared it, and then like you're not going to have a big crowd. Like, and I forgot, I didn't realize the rain, the storm, the cold, whatever it is. So I found, like, if you prepared a drasha, if you got the inspiration for this drasha, I feel like give it with everything that you have. You never know who's in the audience who needs to hear what you have. I feel a partnership with the Ribono Shel Olam as a Rav. Like, these are your children, and you put me in this place to teach, to inspire, to inform. And if this is the inspiration that I have this week, if this either story happened and I hopped it, how it ties in together with this board, or I put this together, it should never be that, like, oh, this isn't the right crowd. I'll save this for another week later. This is what I have this week. This is what I got. And you just never know. You think you're speaking to this person over here needs to hear this message, and there's a woman in the back who, like, is in tears afterwards because they needed to hear that. And your job is to share, to teach whatever inspiration that you got. So if you have it, give it with passion, whether or not the room is half full, completely full. Like, everybody there needs to hear, or you never know who's there who needs to hear what it is that you have to say.
I love that. Yeah, you remind me of a story. There's, I think Joe DiMaggio was playing once, and it was off season. It was like postseason, and he was playing with everything he had. And someone asked him, they said, it doesn't really matter anymore. The season's over. And he said, there may be some kid who came to see me who's never gotten to see me before, and this is his one chance to see me, and I want to give him, the best that I have.
Pocket a story for later, but if you have a drasha prepared, and then, like, you don't feel it's the right week, you got it this week. It's like Shammai and Hillel about finding a nice piece of meat. Shammai would put it away for Shabbos, but Hillel would say, Kol Yom V'Yom, this is what I got. So if this is what you have, use it. Use it. The Rosh will be something else for the following week or whatever you needed for later.
Yeah, amazing.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.